a lot of them assume that, oh, if I'm working in Singapore, if I'm living in Singapore, therefore I definitely can be a director. Actually, that's not true. Generative AI being one of the biggest today. So what is it that government is looking for? The ethics that surrounds generative AI. AI is able to pull content all over the world, so which then results in copyright infringement. Global authorities are trying to see how to clamp it down, right?
Hi everyone, my name is Khang and I'm the co-founder of Inspius. At Inspius, we are your access to the best tech talents in Vietnam. Recently, we just launched Hack. Hack is an AI-powered online coding test platform that allows you to screen software engineer candidates faster, more accurately, and more cost-effectively. Right now, Hack is available for free beta, so please give it a try. I will leave the link to inspius.com and hack.ht in the description down below. Please feel free to leave any comment or feedback in the comment section down below. Welcome to the new episode of From 1 to 100. This podcast series is tailored to the business leader of small and medium enterprises and tech startups. In every episode, we feature a practical and specific lessons to help you to grow your business to the next level. Topics might include, for example, application of AI in businesses, grow your sales, and also how to build a great tech team. So with us today, we have Jae. Jae is the managing director of Ursidae Management and a one-stop shop for all your corporate secretarial work. So they provide services, for example, business registration, incorporation, tax, accountancy, and HR and consultancy. In the previous episode, we have talked about the sexy stuff. For example, the application of AI in sales, marketing, and education. So today, I want to touch on a boring but very important topic that every growing business should know: compliance and regulation. So we have invited an expert on this topic. It's a privilege to have you here with us today, Jay.
Thank you, Khan. It's an honor to be here as well. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes.
Yeah.
The context for our conversation today is that SME are the lifeblood of Singapore economy. It employs about 70% of the total labor force in Singapore. So in terms of regulation and compliance, SME often face issue in dealing with regulation in the emerging area or in sector which cut across multiple agencies. So just last month only, the Minister of State for Trade and Industry, Ms. Lo Yingling, has said that the government is committed to supporting SME to grow and transform. At the same time, during the National Day rally this year, the Prime Minister Lawrence Wong has said that the government is committed to keep the regulatory requirement to the minimum and to ensure a business-friendly environment for all business here in Singapore amid a growing global competition. So the first question I want to ask you is that can you name, for example, the top 3 regulation or compliance issue that typically a growing business would face?
Based on what I've observed recently, especially with the trends, upcoming trends, if you are aware of the recent money laundering case in Singapore, right, where of that $3 billion case. So as a result of that, government is now clamping down on the local directorship. And typically for a lot of private companies, actually a lot of them do not know who or what can be appointed as a director. So let's say, for example, like what constitutes a local director. Of course, Singaporean permanent resident, no issue, right? But if let's say you're a foreigner, a lot of them assume that, oh, if I'm working in Singapore, if I'm living in Singapore, therefore I definitely can be a director. Actually, that's not true. Some clients we have heard before, they actually make comments like, oh, Accra system doesn't stop the appointment, right? You just input the in the system and you submit and it goes through. Therefore, it means it's allowed. Actually, no, that's not true. Because one thing is this, Accra doesn't govern Employment Act. That is actually governed by MOM. So in Accra system, actually, they will definitely say that you need to check and confirm the regulation before you submit. Yeah. So that's the directorship, which comes with the nominee director problem that we are facing right now. So the latest regulatory change is that the government wants all nominee directorship to go through a corporate service provider firm like my company. In the past, no such issues, right? Anybody can be, and therefore everything was out of control, and the a few nominee directors were sent to jail or fined. So now with the clamping down, I think this would be probably the top issue that a lot of private companies will face. Okay, now we talk about that's something that's related to tech. Again, we talk about trending topics, right? Generative AI being one of the biggest today. So what is it that government is looking out for? It's the ethics that surrounds generative AI because of the parameters. Somehow for today, right, AI is able to pull content all over the world, so which then results in copyright infringement. And now global authorities are trying to see how to clamp it down, right? So that's one. Number two, of course, the next biggest thing is cybersecurity. Data security is so important. I'm not sure whether you're aware. Last month, the PDPC, which is the Personal Data Protection Commission, started blasting out email blast to all business owners to remind them to appoint their data protection officer by 30th September, right? Yeah. So a lot of people do not know that this is actually a real compliance requirement in Singapore.
Wow.
Yeah. So probably for me, this would be the top three.
I see. I think that is very relevant. So just now you mentioned about the definition or the term called like nominee director. So maybe like for the audience who are not very aware or maybe familiar with this term, can you explain to us like what is a nominee director compared to an executive director?
Okay. So in Singapore regulation, right, in order to set up a company in Singapore, it is compulsory to appoint a local director. But in a lot of cases, a lot of foreigners, they may not know any local contact personnel who is willing to take up that operational position for them. So therefore, what happens is they look for another person who is willing to just be paper director. Let's call it paper. So basically, what it means is they are not involved in the day-to-day operations of the business. Basically, what happens is this: a lot of all these nominee directors actually do not know that there is a regulation that states very clearly that regardless whether you're a nominee director or you're executive director, you are still liable in the Companies Act. Yeah. So if the company breaches any regulations whatsoever, right, the authorities can still go after you even if you prove that you're a nominee director. To them, there is no difference. Yeah.
Even like for a nominee director, they will still hold like the fiduciary duty to the company, right? And if anything happen or the company breach any law, then he or she, even though as only a nominee director, is still liable in the eyes of the court. Is
Correct.
that
That's
correct?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the changes in the requirement here? You mentioned that we are the ACRA require a local nominee director. So what's the definition for local? Is that a Singaporean PR or
Okay. So Singaporean and PR for sure that one will constitute local. Okay. Your work passes, depending on what work pass you carry. If you're on work permit or S pass holder, you cannot be a director. Employment pass, it depends. If you are an employee of the company that hired you, and if this is your first directorship, no issue. Go ahead and be the director, be the local director. Subsequently, if you want to be a director of another Singapore company, then that will fall under secondary directorship. You will need to seek approval from MOM by applying for letter of consent.
okay? So I think that is a very detailed explanation of the issue. So on the second topic that you mentioned, right, about Gen AI and ethics, because a lot of our audience are tech startup owner, right, and of course the AI is the hottest thing in the town right now. What is the regulation surrounding Gen AI in Singapore?
Oh, I think right now, I think government is still trying to come up with proper regulations around that because it's the same, right? It's a global issue right now. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, our local government is taking a wait and see approach first to see how the rest of the world, particularly USA and all that, to see how they actually respond to Gen AI at the moment. I think it's not very clear cut at the moment what we can or cannot do with Gen AI.
And how about the third topic, cybersecurity? What is the compliance or regulatory issue that and you talk about PDO. So what's the requirement here?
Oh no, so data protection officer, anyone can be. So basically, this person is responsible to govern the data within your organization. It's basically to protect the personal data. It can be your employee, it can be any of your other stakeholders like your customer, your supplier, provider. If it's a personal data, you have to protect that data. That's essentially what it means.
Okay. So basically, every company will need to register their DPO, right? And it can be anyone in a company, or does he or she need to be a qualified or certified DPO to be eligible for the role?
No, you don't need any certification. Anyone can be. It doesn't necessarily need to come from the company. You can even outsource the role. If your company is that small, it doesn't make sense to have a full-time DPO, right? So you can actually outsource.
So I assume that for your company, Ursidae, you guys also provide a nominee
DPO?
DPO?
Oh, actually, no, we don't.
Okay. Okay.
It's a
Sure.
different ball game altogether.
Different program together. Okay. So of course that for most of the company, the top two issues that relating to compliance and regulation are financial reporting and employment. So what do a typical company, maybe for a tech company, what do they need to be aware of in terms of financial reporting and employment? Just like the top issue.
I think a lot of them don't realize that the first things first, right? Your books, it has to reflect a true and fair value of your company's financial status, right? So a lot of them don't actually know exactly what is a financial statement. So you have to make sure that you prepare the financial statement every year, because you have to lay the statement at annual general meeting before you can file your annual return. So that is compulsory, right? You have 6 months to hold your AGM, and then after that, 1 month after that, to do your annual return filing in Accra. So it is advisable for companies to actually hire or engage qualified accountant to do that. Somebody who is proficient with Singapore financial reporting standards. When you talk about financial reporting, it's not just financial statements. There is also tax reporting that you need to do. Again, similarly, you should engage a proper tax agent to help you, because it's not very clear cut what is considered tax deductible and what is not. A lot of business owners actually do not know this. So let's take, for example, medical expenses, which you allow your employees to claim, right? Actually, a lot of people do not know this. Even though you give as a staff benefit, everybody gets to enjoy it, right? There is a cap in IRAS. It's actually a 2% cap of your total remuneration in the whole company. Anything in excess, it becomes non-deductible.
Wow.
Yeah, it's things like that that you have to go through a tax agent. They will show you, they will explain to you what can be deducted, what cannot be deducted. And then there are certain items that when you try to deduct, you have to realize that you may cause an impact on your employees' personal income tax. Things, for example, like company's car. Let's say, for example, company trip, you bring them on a leisure, even if it's the whole company, actually, you guys might be taxed on it on a personal level. Yeah.
So we also talk about government grant. Is government grant tax deductible?
Government grant.
As in, like, does it come up as your revenue?
No, it's not. It's
Okay,
not a
so it's
revenue
not tax
item.
deductible.
We don't call it tax deduct because it's not
Okay,
an expense.
okay, it's not
Yeah,
an expense.
it's not an expense.
Okay,
For government grant, in order to enjoy the grant, what happens is the company actually pays for the service first, or the goods, whichever you are applying the grant for. Then you apply for the grant. The government reimburses you. Yeah. So in that respect, the service that you actually paid for, that would then be tax deductible on the assumption that it's meant for
okay.
business use.
I think I use the word tax deductible wrongly, but basically for government grant, usually it doesn't add up to your revenue.
No.
Okay, cool. And how about employment? We mentioned about
Mm.
financial reporting. So how about employment?
So employment act, there's a lot to employment. There's a lot of aspects to HR that you need to be made aware. Actually, MOM website is pretty clear. What there is, it's just that it's really a lot of information that you need to sift through. So if you do not have that time or patience to go through it, it would be a better idea to speak to HR personnel. Either you hire your own in-house HR, or you look for an outsourced company that specializes in that. I think you guys as well, you are very familiar with HR, same as our company as well. So there are certain compliance things that people need to remember, like your employment contract. what are the key terms that is mandatory to be mentioned. MOM website actually has a template that you can actually use as a base, and then you add in any other terms that you want to add on. Let's say annual leave. What is the minimum annual leave entitlement? You know, this sort of thing. How do you calculate overtime? What is the maximum overtime per month? So these are all the various compliance that every private company should go read.
So I think like for company, they also like have a certain level. So for example, if you have revenue below 1 million, then you do not need to register for GST. But above 1 million in revenue, you need to start register for GST. That's a requirement, right? And maybe like above 10 million for how many consecutive years, then you also need to be audited, right?
So GST registration, it's mandatory once you pass the 1 million threshold, 1 million revenue threshold, and this 1 million is 12 months within a calendar year.
So it's not consecutive 12 months, but it needs to be a 12 month of a calendar year, correct?
Yes, correct. That's right.
Okay. Yeah. So once you pass like the 1 million mark for any calendar year, then you are mandated to register for GST.
Yes, that's right. There's two things. So one is obviously if you immediately know that you are going to pass the 1 million threshold within the calendar year, it can be, let's say for example you're bidding for a project, and you know that, let's say, they are about to confirm the engagement very soon. You need to start preparing for that application. Because definitely you're going to cross that threshold. So that's one. That's the pre-plan, right? Because you can foresee it's coming.
Prospective.
Yeah, correct. The second option, of course, is at the end, let's say you didn't know that you're going to hit, and suddenly, oh, you realize you hit, straight away go and apply.
So that is retrospective, looking at past.
Yeah.
But let's say if you can forecast that you are going to exceed 1 million, then you also need to prepare to register for GST.
Correct, that's right.
And even if your company has below 1 million in revenue, you still can voluntarily register for GST.
Yes, that's right. You can
Okay.
do so. But take note that there are new requirements coming up for voluntary GST requirements. It starts next year, 1st April onwards. If you are a new GST applicant, voluntary applicant, and your company was newly incorporated within 6 months from the date of the application, you have to make sure that your accounting software is invoice now ready. It's a new requirement. From 1st November onwards, next year, 1st November onwards, all voluntary GST applicants, regardless whether you are newly incorporated or not, you will have to make sure your software is invoice now ready.
Okay. So for newly registered company, then by April, your invoice system need to be invoice now ready. But for older companies,
No,
then
not yet. That one not yet. Older companies, they have not released the date yet.
okay.
Yeah, it's 1st April for new applicants who are newly incorporated from the last 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah, and then 1st November, regardless when your incorporation date was, as long as you're a new applicant, you have to make sure your software is invoice now ready.
I see. So for older and already registered, then there's no fixed date yet.
Yes, correct.
Okay. So for GST, from my understanding, is that because a lot of our audience they have like revenue locally and also like have revenue overseas. So when we talk about 1 million, it only require local revenue only, right? So it doesn't count the foreign revenue. Is that
It
correct?
depends. So if you're saying foreign revenue means, does the revenue belong to the local entity, or the foreign revenue belongs to another entity, in another country? If it belongs to the local entity, then no, it's actually both. You have to take both into account because it's still the revenue of the local entity.
Yes. So for example, Inspius had a Singapore entity, but we serve like local clients and foreigner clients, so overseas clients. So for example, some of our clients are in the US. So do the revenues come from US registered entity, add up to the 1 million?
No, if you have a US registered entity, then no, it belongs to the US registered entity.
No, that is from our
Or
clients.
from your client, then no, it is your your revenue. The invoice came from your company, right?
Yes.
Then yes, it's your revenue.
But it from the foreign entity.
It doesn't matter. It's
Doesn't
still,
matter?
yeah.
Okay.
It's total revenue.
Sure. So is there anything else that a company need to be aware in terms of GST?
Yes, your invoice template. It has to have like similar to employment contract, what are the key terms, right? So for GST invoice, what items appear on the invoice is also very important. So you must have customer name, customer address, the description of the goods or service that you supply, the GST rate, invoice date, invoice unique reference number, then followed by your GST total payable, your total payable excluding GST, total GST, followed by total payable including GST. And if your invoice is in a foreign currency, you must convert it to Sing dollar after that, right? But your conversion rate, you must use IRAS approved exchange rates. You can find it on IRAS website. And your presentation of your invoice at the end, it would be total payable excluding GST, total payable including GST, followed by total GST. The arrangement is slightly different.
So if our clients are in the US, so do they still need to pay for Singapore GST?
No, because the service is provided. It depends on where your service was provided. Yeah.
As in, like we are a Singapore company, but we provide a online service to a client in the US. So because that is also applied to a lot of our audience
Yeah,
here.
technically,
Because like for tech company, right,
yeah, I
it's
know.
quite hard where to
Correct.
put like where do we provide the service.
So you always have to ask yourself this: where was the service performed? If you're so in your case, you carried out the service in Singapore, it's actually GST taxable.
So
Yeah.
even like for our client in the US, they will still need to pay the Singapore
Correct.
GST.
Yes, you will
Okay.
have to.
Okay. So that is for the invoice that we are sending to clients. And how about the invoices that we receive? So when we want to claim back the GST that we pay out to our vendors, what do we need to be sure of to so that the tax officer from ACRA or IRAS, doesn't give us a lot of.
So when your supplier sends you the invoice and they're also GST registered, you also have to make sure that the presentation of their invoice is done correctly. Yeah, if it's wrong, then you should actually flag out to them because it may cause you issues when you try to claim it back.
I see. Okay. So that is the GST issue. That is for the $1 million threshold. But as maybe like some our audience here has grown to the mark of like 10 million.
Right? Okay. So that one is more on the audit exemption requirement. So there's three measurements. The first one will be your total revenue, as you mentioned, right? 10 million. Whether it's above or below $10 million. The second criteria is your total assets. Your asset value, is it also 10 million? And your number of employees, is it less than or more, at least 50 employees, right? So out of the three items that I just mentioned, you need to pass two. What I mean by pass two, so if let's say your revenue and your asset are both less than 10 million, you don't have to do audit. Similarly, any combination of the two, right? So if let's say your revenue is less than 10 million, you have less than 50 employees, you're also exempted. So this is what we call a small companies exemption. Yeah. And let's say if you fail the criteria in your first year, because it's only on the third year, because they say you need to fail 2 consecutive years. So if you fail the first year, then you try again for the second year. The second year, oh, you fail again. Sorry, you have to be audited in the third year.
Okay, so that is the requirement. So if you fail all the three criteria for 2 consecutive years, then on the third year, then your books need to be audited by a public firm, public register.
Correct. Public accounting firm.
Public
You
accounting
fail
firm.
2 out of 3, you already have to do already. Not all three. 2 out of 3.
2 out of 3.
Either you pass 2 out of 3 or you fail 2 out of 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then for 2 consecutive years. Okay.
2 consecutive years.
Okay. So a lot of our audience, they also start hiring, for example, local and foreigners. So what are some of the points that they need to look out for? Let's start with hiring local Singaporean and PR.
So for Singaporean PR, you have to contribute their CPF, right? What we call Central Provident Fund. You have to set up a CPF account, and then you have to make a contribution to them every month when you are dispersing their salary. The CPF, of course, that contribution is net of their salary, so they will take back the net disposable income for themselves. At the same time, you also have to pay this thing what we call Skills Development Levy (SDL) for all employees, not just locals. Let's say you don't have any local. If let's say you only have foreigners, let's say employment pass holders, right? Where do you then pay this SDL? Actually, it's not through CPF because you don't have any locals, you can't pay. So you have to pay at Go Business under the SDL payment services. Yeah.
Yes, I feel like the SDL is quite tricky because it's applicable to all of your employees, regardless whether they are local, Singaporean, PR, or foreigners. So a
Correct.
lot of companies make a mistake on that, right? About CPF, they also a cap for the CPF, right?
Yes, correct.
And how about hiring foreigner? A little bit more tricky, I guess.
So hiring foreigners, you have to look at where they come from, the nationality, right? I mean, of course, if they tell you immediately that they want to go for employment pass, then you don't really need to check the nationality. Okay, so let's make it simpler first. Look at nationality. There are certain countries that if the applicant doesn't mind, we can actually go through work permit route, like Malaysians, PRC, or Korea, South Korea, right? You can actually apply work permit for them. No issue. There are certain businesses where government actually gives certain leeway for some nationality to fall under the work permit regime as well. So, for example, Bangladesh, Indians, Philippines. But only for certain businesses like food processing, F&B, and manufacturing. Yeah, correct. F&B. So other than that, other companies do not have this uh, privilege. Okay, so for work permit holders, or rather to apply for work permit, you must make sure that you purchase a foreign medical insurance. This is compulsory by MOM. So the coverage, it has to be at least $60,000 per annum. Yeah, and of course check whether your company has a quota. So for a new incorporated company, right, I'm gonna tell you a secret. I don't know whether anybody knows this. When you hire your first local, actually you can immediately hire your first work permit holder on a one-to-one, usually Malaysian, right? So one-on-one. The so-called that quota, the strict quota only kicks in after the first Malaysian is hired. Yeah.
So for the second work permit holder.
Yeah, then the quota, you have to check based on your industry where you're working at, and then you check the quota, whether you have enough quota. For S Pass, you have to look at the minimum wage, right? Right now, I think the value is at $3,150 dollars per month. But then for financial services, it's slightly higher. It's at 3,650 right now, and then next year they're going to increase again. So check and make sure that you can fulfill that minimum wage requirement. Otherwise, you can't go ahead. And then quota is very high for S Pass as well. I think it's a lot higher than work permit.
From my understanding, is that we need to have at least six Singaporean and PR to have like one
I think it depends on your industry. I
industry as
think
well.
services like yours and mine, if I'm not mistaken, is 9 Singaporeans. I mean 9 locals. So whether it's a PR or
Nine
local.
local for one slot for
Yeah,
S
correct.
Pass.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct. And even when you talk about locals, right, you have to make sure they meet the local qualifying salary of 1.6K per month. Yeah.
And how about EP?
EP, there's no quota requirement, no levy as well. But EP, you have to go through this thing called the compass test. Yeah, so as long as your compass test scores 40 points, you more or less you should be able to get a application approved. Otherwise, you can try to appeal to MOM. Yeah.
That is all the most popular issue that a growing company would face. Do you want to have any advice for our own audience here to stay compliant in Singapore?
Yeah, I think it's very important who you look for advice. Not every company are the same. Not everybody is as knowledgeable or as ethical, or and some, they may not be able to provide you with full advice of the picture or whatever. It'll be good if you guys can read up on your own. There's a lot of information on our government websites. The information are actually all very easily accessible, but you need to take the time to read through because it can be very overwhelming. Yeah, or you can just look for me.
Okay. So after that, with that, we will conclude our episode for today. And I hope that all of our audience here will stay compliant in Singapore. And to stay compliant, maybe you guys that need to look for partners. So feel free to reach out to Jae from Ursidae here. Okay. Thank you. And I will look forward to seeing you again in the next episode. Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.
Thank you everyone for watching the episode. If you like the content that we share today, please like our video and subscribe to our channel. That would be a huge encouragement to us all, and that will also help more people to benefit from the content that we share today. And I look forward to seeing you again in the next episode. Bye bye.